When you look at the vast majority of retro shooters, or boomer shooters as they're also called, you can generally see the application of 3D movement and gunplay that dates all the way back to the first Quake, as well as the more recent Doom entries that have also taken inspiration from it. The first Quake is arguably the most influential game for the boomer shooter genre because it had established the blueprint of a fully fledged 3D arena, with fast-paced gunplay and hidden mechanics that only made it even faster. In saying that though, not all retro shooters play like the original Quake, given the fact that other shooters have also provided a source of inspiration for newer retro-inspired games. This is what we call Wolfendoom games. The term Wolfendoom specifically relates to shooters inspired by Wolfenstein 3D and the first two Doom games, rather than being by either Quake 1 or the recent Doom entries like Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. They offer the same sprite-based graphics and environments, along with raycasting to give off a pseudo 3D effect because of the flat sprites provided. In the case of Quake 1, it was one of the earlier examples of polygonal 3D, and would create the shift from sprites to polygons used within the 3D realm of FPS gaming. The Wolfendoom side of boomer shooters, or retro shooters however, returns an earlier format of FPS gaming, with tight corridors and hallways, pixelated sprites and simplistic movement, but satisfying gunplay. In this video, I will be talking about one of them, a game that I quite enjoyed and it reminded me of a time where you don't always need an overly complex shooter with advanced mechanics as well as pretty graphics, but something that is simple and retro, while still applying new spins to the formula. One of these games is Project Warlock. Project Warlock is the wet dream of Jacob Sislow come true, the developer behind the game, who was introduced to games like Blood, Heretic and Doom by his father. The simple but addictive gunplay had got him hooked, even to the point of favoring them over newer shooters that were advancing in both technological progress and revolutionizing what a game could be. Take for instance the first Half-Life, a game that showed that an FPS at the time could still be fun and satisfying in its gameplay, but also have a great story with great buildings surrounding it. In the case of Project Warlock, it is an echo of the Doom clone period, or the Wolfendoom period, or games inspired by both Doom and Wolfenstein 3D, where story wasn't much of a concern other than just to provide context to what you were doing and why you were doing it. Once the idea for Project Warlock was realized, the developers set to work on what was originally known as Exitium 3D, the name that would later become Project Warlock. With some crowdfunding and assistance from other people that would comprise of a small team with an artist, a level designer and a sound designer, it would be enough to make the game that you can now play, known as Project Warlock. The premise of the game is that you play as a nameless warlock whose goal is to eradicate all evil from the world. That's it. There's no backstory to the character's past. We don't learn anything about the character other than the fact that he can wield and use magic, on top of being able to use a variety of weapons to use against the hordes of evil, so to speak, across the different areas within the game's world. There are about 5 main episodes, each with their own levels and boss fights. With your character's hub, you go to each location with their setting, theme and enemy types, as well as using a combination of both magic and guns together to wipe out all the enemies of the world, all the evil in the world, which fulfills the Heretic side of magic-based gameplay, as well as the effective and explosive weaponry of games like Blood and Doom. Personally, I don't care that much for magic. I generally prefer either using guns or melee combat where I can get right up in the opponent's face, but Project Warlock has a perfect harmony of balancing them out to the point where you need both if you want to tackle the enemies effectively. The game itself also takes elements of both roguelike and RPG mechanics, such as the level progression system of your character, the perks that you can obtain that give you unique advantages of the levels, the upgrades that you can obtain for your weapons using upgrade points, as well as the acquisition of new spells, each with their own advantages and disadvantages. The difficulty of the game itself relates more to the roguelike aspect, at least in terms of the fact that you have lives, as well as having to start at the beginning of the episode that you're up to if you die, or on the hardest difficulty, dying means that you start all over again. Leveling up is pretty seamless, you don't really notice it much, but it goes up at a fairly normal pace, especially as you comb through all of the non-linear levels that this game has to offer. As you progress through Project Warlock, you'll begin to notice a lot of things going for it, and most of it is really good, I might add. For starters, the environments and their enemies. Each episode has a different theme going for it, from medieval dungeons and castles to a frozen heap with a facility inside it, an industrial complex full of machines and broken down equipment, an ancient labyrinth of Egyptian structures and monstrosities, and finally hell itself. That is a combination of all of the locations you've visited, as well as the enemies you've fought. The roster for this game is huge, in both the enemies and the variety of weapons that you come across, compounded by the choice of upgrades too that have their advantages and disadvantages, as well as the spells that you obtain. The sprite work is fantastic too, on top of the game's effect of 2.5D level structuring, giving off a simple but effective display of 3D that you see on the screen, in the surrounding environments and the buildings that you see, as well as the weapons that you use, and the sprite enemies that you see. Doom and Wolfenstein 3D were known for doing this, but Project Warlock does it in a more modernized fashion where it's appreciated even more. The variety in its aesthetics is wonderful, and the artists went to the level of creating monsters that are unique to each episode, which is great because some games like the first Quake made you fight the same enemies across each dimension, which was honestly pretty lame in retrospect. Weapons behave similarly to their sources of inspiration. Magic spells vary from being utility based, like the spell that generates ammo, creating a flashlight, or another spell that creates a spark that acts as a temporary sentry, which is great for wiping out enemies. The upgrades, however, are final, so once you invest in them, you have to commit to their strengths and accept their weaknesses for the playthrough. But because of that same reason, the game itself does encourage multiple playthroughs, trying different builds or approaches to your style of play. And in the case of dying, depending on what difficulty you're playing on, restarting the level allows your character to continue leveling up, increasing the stats and unlocking more perks, like Ghost where you can phase through enemies, or Sprinter that increases the speed of your character that you can toggle on or off. On the side of the game's graphics, there's a good deal of customization involved in the shader system the game has. You can further pixelate the game to make it look even more retro, as well as applying different color palettes, ranging from the C64 to the ZX Spectrum, the Game Boy, and even the Pico 8 Fantasy console getting the same treatment too, which is nice. However, some of the shaders make it a lot harder to see in some levels, which eventually led to me not using it again after entertaining the usage of it for a couple of minutes. Though it's really cool to see that these options exist in some of the retro shooters that I've played, like Dusk and Ultra Kill, that also have the same feature. Level progression is pretty much like Doom or Wolfenstein 3D. You find keys that lead to doors and rooms with other keys, which eventually lead to the exit door. Rinse and repeat. The only levels that differ are the final levels for each episode, where they generally consist of one large arena for the boss. However, with Project Warlock, there are some things that I don't like about it. For starters, not being able to jump. It's something that you don't really often see in Doom clones or Wolfendoom style games, but if the game is taking a more modernized approach to it, then there's no reason not to implement the jump mechanic, especially if there's ways to do it in regards to the game's platforming, especially when you have pitfalls, which by the way are really annoying given the game's sense of gravity. The pitfalls make you land in milliseconds, almost instant, especially in one of the hell levels where there's nothing but pitfalls that kill you instantly, forcing you to restart the level. This is one of the most annoying ways to die in the game, but you don't see it often enough to the point where it becomes unplayable. Also, there's no quick saving whatsoever, which ties into the old school approach towards the game's difficulty. But if you want to play the game at your leisure while still having a fair challenge, then I'd recommend the easiest difficulty, where you restart as many times as you want. In regards to the enemies themselves, they attack really fast, before you even turn the corner. They don't have any chill whatsoever, so you'll have to be careful, especially on the harder difficulties where their attack speed is increased. The sound department comes packaged with crisp weapon sounds and explosions, and the soundtrack is large and varied, bouncing from ambient and intense electronic soundscapes to metal-infused tracks at different points in the game. Nothing really stood out for me personally, but the tracks enhance the existing gameplay where it just kind of blends in, which is still a good thing because sound is one of the key elements within a game that is underestimated in terms of how hard it is to do well. The animations are also nicely done with the billboarding sprites. The frames between them are fluid without appearing too janky, and the design behind it is, as I said, unique to their own respective episodes. The game gives you a lot of bang for your buck in terms of the weapon variety, the spells, the monsters, and the locations, and even the option to choose single levels that you want to replay again, and even an endless mode with the same character progression system, where you level up and assign points to the attributes of your character, as well as getting spells and weapon upgrades. But by the time I finished the campaign, I was pretty much done with it. And that's Project Warlock, a very solid and to the brim Wolfendoom inspired shooter with a good deal of content and a huge roster of monsters and weapons on top of the spells and weapon upgrades. The game is a modern mirror of an older approach to the shooters that existed from the Doom engine, as well as the build engine that allowed games like Blood, Shadow Warrior, and Duke Nukem 3D to come to life. The proto method of FPS game design may not be for everyone though. Some may ask for more out of the shooter, like advanced movement, 3D environments, and graphics using polygons rather than sprites, or even just something that reflects the modern times of FPS gaming and all the bells and whistles that come along with it. But games like Project Warlock that modernize the Wolfendoom approach to FPS design is great, bringing something that's familiar but fresh. If you want something that is more akin to classic Doom or Wolfenstein 3D, then I'd recommend that you try Project Warlock, especially if you want to be a wizard and a blood-crazed gunaholic at the same time. Also, if you're interested in making a game like this, then I would highly recommend checking out the Easy FPS Editor, made by Jessica Chan. It already provides an FPS controller akin to Wolfendoom styled or even build engine styled games, along with a 2D map editor and no coding required. All you need is an idea and a collection of sprites and textures, and you can already make a simple but workable FPS game. I'll provide a link for it in the description. Thank you for watching.